Well, the next airplane we're going to look at is the first airplane that we had here at the park, and was the Anchor, if you will. It was flown, this airplane was flown by General Dan Cherry. In the skies of Hanoi, Dan was flying this very airplane when he and his wingman, four-ship, attacked MiG-21s over the skies of Hanoi. And he was in a dogfight with this MiG-21 and was able to maneuver behind him and shoot him down. Dan says that when he shot him, the missile at him, and blew the right wing off the airplane, and the airplane started corkscrewing in front of him, and out popped the pilot with his flight suit and the chute streaming behind him, and Dan had to aggressively maneuver his airplane to keep from running into him. Anyway, that's the background of this airplane and Dan Cherry. What Dan Cherry did was, one day, he's in a walking group, and one day they went to the National Museum of the Air Force up in Dayton, Ohio, just to get a guided tour. And the tour guide said, you know, you guys might be interested, but near here, said there's an airplane that has significance to you guys. And he pointed to Dan Cherry and said, the airplane that you were in when you shot down a MiG over Hanoi in 1972 is over the next small town, Enid, Ohio, sitting in front of VFW. And so they finished their tour, and of course the guys had to go over there and look at this airplane, and there she sat. Derelict, was in really, really bad shape, but the star, which you see here, that signifies MiG-21, 16 April 1972, was on the splitter plate on that airplane. It was gray, looked awful, but it was on there. And so Dan had a little heart-to-heart with her when they went over there. But then they were driving back to Bowling Green, and that's all they could talk about was, well, tell us about it. Tell us what happened. Tell us about it. So he was telling the story, and they said, you know, it's a shame. An airplane as significant as that to a local aviator here in Bowling Green is up here and looks like that. There ought to be some way so that we could get her back here and make her look like she did. And so they went to the Air Force and said, we'd like to get her back to Bowling Green. Still didn't know anything about the park. There wasn't any idea about the park at that point. But they said, we're going to get her back here. And then they're talking to Ray Buckberry, who's quite a historian. He's one of our director emeritus's. And Ray Buckberry, we call him SAR, S-A-R. So SAR had all these records of the aviators that we're going to talk about today. And they said, you know, it's awful that we've got all these stories of local aviators that have made such a significant contribution to the history of flight, and nobody knows about the stories. Wouldn't it be great if we could have a park here so we could display artifacts and tell the stories? That's how the park got started, is when they went and visited and found this airplane up in Enid, Ohio. Took the wings off of it, brought it back here, put it back together, restored it, and then brought it out here to the park when there wasn't anything here but gravel. The only thing that was here when they brought this airplane out here was the concrete pads where the gear is connected, and then they built the park around it. So this airplane sat here for quite some time with no other artifacts while we were looking for artifacts. When we were telling Dan's story, here the story gets better. They said, well, did the pilot live? I said, I have no idea. Last time I saw him, he was hanging in a parachute. And so they did some research, contacted a producer of a show in Vietnam, and she thought maybe he was just, somebody that was just pulling her leg or whatever, but they were able to communicate back and forth until she realized that it was, in fact, real, what Dan was saying. And they did research, and they found the pilot. His name is Hong Lee, and he was alive and well, and he lived in Hanoi. And we used to have a program here in the United States called This Is Your Life. When I was a youngster growing up, I can remember that program being on TV, and basically what it would do is it'd have a person on the show, and it would bring people back that had been part of their life. This is your life, and they bring them out, and they tell stories about growing up and all that. Well, they had a similar show in Vietnam, whose purpose was bringing families back together who had been separated by the war. People from North Vietnam, South Vietnam, they'd not seen each other, and so they would bring them back together. And so they contacted Hong Mi, talked to Dan, and said to Dan, would you be willing to come to Vietnam and meet Hong Mi live on TV? And Dan and them agreed. So off they went, and we have video of and pictures of Dan standing there on the stage, and they ask Hong Mi to come out, and Hong Mi comes out from behind a partition, and he walks over to Dan, and Dan and he shake hands. And Hong Mi said, it's nice to see that you are in good health. I hope we can become friends. Then he invites Dan, who was going to leave there and come back to the States, invites Dan to come to Hanoi and meet his family. So they changed their air reservations, flew to Hanoi, went to Hong Mi's home, and Hong Mi had a grandson about his age, your son's age. And in their world, their grandchildren are precious. And Hong Mi took his grandchild and handed him to them. That's a big thing. They ate dinner. We got pictures of them eating dinner there together, all of them around their table. And then Hong Mi takes Dan on a tour of Hanoi on the back of his scooter, because everybody has scooters there, and they went all over, and Hong Mi showed Dan all over that night, and then the next day took him around and showed him to museums and things. Went to the Hanoi prison, where they had many of the U.S. pilots that had been shot down in prison there, and Dan visited the prison, and they had pictures on the wall of prisoners that were there, and Dan was standing there looking at the pictures. And Hong Mi had given Dan some room while he was looking, and he walked over, and he said, is that your friend? Do you know him? And Dan pointed to it and said, he's my friend. But he was released when they released the POWs and came back. And I met him here looking at this F4 one day. This guy, didn't know who he was, but I met him. And but anyway, we wanted to tell Dan's story. After the war, Dan serves in the Air Force, and he becomes commander of the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds. They were flying 238s when Dan was the commander, so he was commander for Thunderbirds, and then he got promoted to Brigadier General, and then he served on an IG team, and then he retired from the Air Force. Went to work for several companies here in Bowling Green, and then he was asked to serve as part of the governor's staff, and so he went to Frankfurt and served on the governor's staff for a while until the governor was no longer elected, and then he came back to Bowling Green and did some things around here, and then he joined the board of Aviation Heritage Park and was one of our first board members that we had. Was the president of the second president that we had of Aviation Heritage Park board of directors. And we wanted to tell Dan's story, and it all started with this F4, a very airplane. And she's painted today just like she looked the day that Dan shot down that MiG over Hanoi. Oh, I forgot to tell you this. When Dan left Hanoi, he invited Hong Mi to come here to visit him, and Hong Mi accepted. And Hong Mi was here in Bowling Green on the day that we had the dedication of Aviation Heritage Park, and he helped untie the ribbon that floated away that uncovered the center stone of the official dedication of Aviation Heritage Park. Hong Mi was here, and he sat. We've got pictures of Hong Mi sitting in this seat up here, and I don't know whether it's true or not, but it's a great story. We think that that's the only time that a guy had been shot down, sat in the very seat of the airplane that shot him down. One night when they were in, let me tell you this story. One night when they were in Hanoi, in what we call Saigon, but now they call Ho Chi Minh City. They were at a nightclub bar, and they were over the table, and they were talking. And Hong Mi, who spoke a little English, asked Dan, when you shot me down, did you this or did you this? Now, when you fire missiles, you can either fire them by pulling the trigger, or you can fire them by pushing a button. Well, this airplane doesn't have a gun on board, so there was no gun to fire, but he used his finger, index finger, to fire the missile. And so Dan said, and Hong Mi took Dan's hand, and he goes, like, hits his finger like, bad hand, bad finger, bad finger. But anyway, they had a great time telling about how the dogfight occurred and what each one of them did and what the other one did, so they had a great time. But Hong Mi's been back to the States here a couple of 3 times. He and Dan became a Huntley-Brinkley briefing team, if you will, and so they went into Washington State. They've been to Florida to Sun and Fun. They've been to the Smithsonian in Washington